The most successful supercar brand in Italian history was not founded by an engineer. It was not founded by a racing driver, or a visionary designer, or a man with a lifelong dream of building sports cars. It was founded by a farmer. A farmer who raised chickens, repaired tractors, and one afternoon in 1963, drove to Maranello with a complaint about a broken clutch. What Enzo Ferrari said to him in response, in less than 60 seconds, became the most expensive insult in automotive history. Because that farmer went home, picked up the phone, and started building a company that would spend the next 60 years making Ferrari look over its shoulder. This is the story of Ferruccio Lamborghini. And it begins not with a sports car, but with the rubble of a world war. In the summer of 1947, northern Italy was still pulling itself out of the wreckage of the Second World War. Cities had been bombed. Farms had been abandoned. The road infrastructure that had once made Italy one of Europe's most connected nations was shattered. In this environment, a 26-year-old mechanic from the small town of Cento, in the Emilia-Romagna region, saw something that almost nobody else did. Not ruins. Opportunity. Ferruccio Lamborghini had spent the war years repairing military vehicles for the Italian Royal Air Force. He was not a trained engineer. He had no university degree. What he had was an extraordinary ability to understand machines, to hear them, feel them, and know instinctively what they needed. When the war ended, the Italian countryside was full of surplus military vehicles, jeeps, trucks, armored carriers, sitting abandoned in fields, on roadsides, in government depots. Lamborghini started buying them. He stripped them down, rebuilt their engines, adapted their chassis, and turned them into agricultural tractors. It was unglamorous work. But post-war Italy desperately needed tractors, and Ferruccio Lamborghini was the man willing to build them. Within 5 years, his company, Lamborghini Trattori, was employing hundreds of people. Within 10, it was one of the largest tractor manufacturers in Italy. By the early 1960s, Ferruccio Lamborghini was a rich man. Not quietly rich. Visibly rich. He lived in a villa. He threw parties. He collected watches. He drove fast cars. And the fastest car he drove, the car he was proudest of, was a Ferrari 250 GT. It was, by any measure, one of the most beautiful machines in the world. A hand-built Grand Tourer from Maranello. 12 cylinders. The sound of a mechanical symphony at high revs. The kind of car that made people stop and stare on any road in Europe. Ferruccio loved it. He also had a problem with it. The clutch kept failing. It was not a minor annoyance. It was a recurring mechanical fault, the kind that left you stranded, that required specialist repairs, that cost money and time and, above all, dignity. For a man who built machines for a living, driving a car with a defective component was a personal affront. He complained to his Ferrari dealer. He was told the car was fine. He complained again. He was told, with increasing politeness, that this was a racing car company, and that perhaps the fault lay with how the car was being driven. Ferruccio Lamborghini was not a man who accepted that answer. So he decided to go to the source. The drive from Cento to Maranello takes about 40 minutes on the roads of the Po Valley, flat, straight roads through agricultural land, the kind of landscape Ferruccio Lamborghini knew better than anyone. It is not recorded exactly what day in 1963 he made the journey. What is recorded is what happened when he arrived. He asked to speak with Enzo Ferrari. And remarkably, given that Enzo Ferrari was one of the most famous and most reclusive men in Italian industry, he was shown in. What followed was a short conversation. Ferruccio explained his concern. The clutch on the 250 GT was defective. He had experienced the problem repeatedly. He believed he knew the cause. The clutch mechanism was being sourced from a tractor supplier, the same type of components he himself used in his own agricultural machines. The fix, he suggested, was straightforward. Enzo Ferrari listened. And then, according to every account of the meeting, he said something that would cost him, and the automotive world, everything that came next. The exact wording varies by source, but the meaning is consistent across all of them. Ferrari told Lamborghini, in effect, that a tractor manufacturer had no business telling him how to build a sports car. That Ferruccio should go back to his tractors, and leave the question of sports cars to the people who understood them. Then he ended the meeting. Ferruccio Lamborghini drove back to Cento. He did not speak publicly about what had been said for many years. He was not, by nature, a vindictive man. He was pragmatic, energetic, forward-looking. He did not spend time nursing grievances. But something had shifted. He had been dismissed. Not by a bureaucrat, not by a salesman, not by someone he considered his equal in matters of mechanical understanding. He had been dismissed by the man widely regarded as the greatest automotive mind in Italy, and he had been wrong to do so. Ferruccio Lamborghini spent the drive home thinking. By the time he arrived at his factory, he had made a decision. He was going to build a sports car. Not to compete with Ferrari. Not to impress anyone. He was going to build one because he believed he could build a better one. And he was going to find out if he was right. He picked up the phone and called Giotto Bizzarini. Giotto Bizzarini was not available by accident. He had, until very recently, been Ferrari's chief engine designer, arguably the most gifted automotive engineer in Italy. He had led the team that created the Ferrari 250 GTO engine, one of the most celebrated power plants in racing history. And he had just been fired. In 1961, Ferrari had experienced what became known internally as the Palace Revolt, a mass resignation of senior engineers and executives who had grown frustrated with Enzo Ferrari's management style, his autocracy, his refusal to share credit. Bizzarini was among them. He found himself, in early 1963, a man of extraordinary talent with no employer. Lamborghini offered him a contract. The terms were unusual. Bizzarini would be paid by results, a flat fee per unit of horsepower delivered in the finished engine. The more powerful the engine, the more he earned. It was the kind of arrangement that could only have been proposed by a man who understood incentives, and accepted by a man who was supremely confident in his own abilities. Bizzarini went to work. Meanwhile, Lamborghini was assembling the rest of his team. He hired Franco Scaglione for bodywork, and when Scaglione's designs proved unsatisfactory, he brought in Carrozzeria Touring of Milan, then eventually settled on the young designer Giampaolo Dallara for chassis engineering. The average age of Lamborghini's engineering team in 1963 was 27 years old. These were not seasoned veterans of the automotive industry. They were brilliant, ambitious, and deeply frustrated by the conservatism of the established Italian manufacturers. They had ideas that nobody had let them execute. Ferruccio gave them a factory, a budget, and a single instruction. Build me the best Grand Tourer in the world. The engine Bizzarini delivered was a masterpiece. A 60-degree V12, displacing 3.5 liters, producing 270 horsepower in its initial road-going configuration, and capable of significantly more in racing tune. It was positioned longitudinally in the chassis, mounted behind the front axle, with a 5-speed gearbox. And the clutch, deliberately, pointedly, was a completely new design. Not sourced from any tractor supplier. Not shared with any other vehicle. Purpose-built, by hand, for this car and this car alone. When Lamborghini examined the finished engine on the test bench, he reportedly stood in silence for a long moment. Then he turned to Bizzarini and told him to put it in a road car. There was, however, a problem that nobody had anticipated. The factory in Sant'Agata Bolognese, a small town 6 kilometers from Maranello, was not yet finished. The production line did not exist. The workforce had no experience building sports cars. They had experience building tractors. Ferruccio Lamborghini solved this the way he solved every problem. He threw money at it, demanded speed, and walked the factory floor every day asking why things were not moving faster. In October 1963, less than 12 months after the meeting with Enzo Ferrari, Lamborghini unveiled the 350 GTV prototype at the Turin Motor Show. The reaction was not what he expected. The car was beautiful. The engine was exceptional. But the show car had been completed in such haste that when journalists looked under the hood, they found that the engine bay was filled with ballast weights, the actual engine was not yet properly installed. The automotive press, knowing Ferrari's scrutiny was never more intense, noticed. Some were unkind. Ferruccio Lamborghini went back to Sant'Agata. He told his team they had 6 months. In April 1964, the production Lamborghini 350 GT rolled off the line. It was not the same car that had been shown in Turin. The bodywork had been redesigned by Touring, the chassis refined, the engine fully mapped and tested. It produced 270 horsepower in road trim. It reached 280 km per hour. Contemporary road tests placed it ahead of the Ferrari 250 GT in straight-line performance. More quietly, more pointedly, its clutch worked perfectly. But the story was not finished. Because in 1966, something happened that nobody on Lamborghini's team had planned, but that would define the company for the next half-century. A 22-year-old engineer named Gian Paolo Dallara, working with Bob Wallace and a young designer named Marcello Gandini, came to Ferruccio with a proposal. They wanted to build a mid-engine sports car. Not a grand tourer. Not a comfortable road car. A racing-derived machine with the engine mounted behind the driver and ahead of the rear axle, a configuration that Ferrari, at that point, had never used in a road car. Ferruccio, by his own account, told them he was not interested. He was building grand tourers. Cars for wealthy men who wanted to travel quickly in comfort. Racing machines were not his business. Dallara and Wallace built it anyway. In their spare time, after hours, on weekends, using factory materials and the tools available to them. Ferruccio knew. He let it continue. What they produced was the Lamborghini Miura, shown at the 1966 Geneva Motor Show on a bare rolling chassis, without a body. Orders came in before the body was even attached. The Miura was unlike anything the automotive world had seen. Its transversely mounted V12, the engine rotated 90 degrees and positioned across the car rather than along it, was a packaging solution of radical ingenuity. The resulting silhouette, designed by Marcello Gandini at Bertone, remains to this day one of the most beautiful shapes ever applied to a road vehicle. Road and Track magazine tested it in 1967 and recorded a top speed of 274 km per hour, making it the fastest production road car in the world at that moment. Enzo Ferrari, upon seeing the Miura, is reported to have said that Lamborghini had built a racing car dressed as a road car, and that it would be impossible to drive. People lined up to buy it anyway. By 1968, Lamborghini was no longer chasing Ferrari. He had, without entirely meaning to, created something different, a rival school of thought about what a sports car should be. Ferrari's philosophy was rooted in motorsport. Racing first, road cars as a commercial necessity. Enzo Ferrari built road cars to fund his racing. The cars reflected that, raw, demanding, occasionally difficult to live with. Lamborghini's philosophy was the opposite. He had no interest in racing. He had banned his engineers from entering any Lamborghini in competition. He wanted his cars to be the best grand tourers in the world, supremely fast, yes, but also beautiful, comfortable, and refined. Where Ferrari gave you drama, Lamborghini gave you theater. Where Ferrari gave you a connection to the track, Lamborghini gave you a connection to the road. And then, in 1971, came the car that would make that distinction irrelevant, because it was so extraordinary that it transcended both categories. The Countach. It was shown at the Geneva Motor Show in March of that year, designed once again by Marcello Gandini, and it looked like nothing on earth that had preceded it. Where the Miura was sensuous and curved, the body of a thoroughbred horse, the Countach was angular, aggressive, almost alien. Wedge-shaped. Scissor doors. Air intakes carved into the bodywork like ventilation slots on a spaceship. When Nuccio Bertone first saw the prototype, he reportedly used a Piedmontese exclamation, Countach, an expression of astonished disbelief. Lamborghini used it as the car's name. It went on sale in 1974. It would remain in production, in evolving forms, until 1990. For an unbroken run of 16 years, the Lamborghini Countach was the poster on the bedroom wall of an entire generation. Not a Ferrari. Not a Porsche. A Lamborghini. Ferruccio himself had sold the company by then. In 1972, facing financial difficulties from a failed venture into hydraulic equipment, he sold his majority stake. He would sell his remaining shares in 1974, and retire to a vineyard in Umbria, where he made wine until his death in 1993. He never lost his interest in tractors. He never stopped attending agricultural machinery shows. He also never, as far as anyone has recorded, contacted Ferrari again. He did not need to. Today, Lamborghini is part of the Volkswagen Group, owned by Audi, manufacturing in the same factory in Sant'Agata Bolognese that Ferruccio built in 1963. The company produces around 10,000 cars per year. Its waiting lists extend years into the future. Its revenue exceeds €3 billion annually. Every car it makes carries a name from the world of bullfighting: Miura, Countach, Diablo, Murcielago, Gallardo, Huracan, Urus, Revuelto. The tradition was started by Ferruccio, who was a passionate aficionado of the corrida. The factory sits 6 kilometers from Maranello. You could walk it in under 2 hours. For 60 years, the two companies have occupied that same small stretch of the Po Valley, making cars that cost more than houses, powered by engines that sound like nothing else on earth, fighting a rivalry that began with a broken clutch and an insult delivered in under 60 seconds. Ferrari has won 24 World Sportscar Championship titles. Lamborghini has won none, because Ferruccio banned his company from racing, and his successors largely honored that decision. Ferrari has won 16 Formula One Constructors' Championships. Lamborghini has entered Formula One as an engine supplier once, in the early 1990s, with unremarkable results. By the metrics of motorsport, it is not a contest. But every time someone sees a Lamborghini on the street, that low silhouette, those scissor doors, that engine note that seems too large for the body that contains it, they do not think about race results. They think about something that is almost impossible to manufacture deliberately. They think about desire. Ferruccio Lamborghini did not set out to create desire. He set out to prove a point, to build a clutch that worked, in a car that was better than the one that had humiliated him. He succeeded. The rest, as it turns out, was just details.